Welcome to our Fireside chat on accelerating digital transformation and innovation in the industrial cybersecurity. My name is Chetnan Boudry. I am VP of Business Development for Nozomi Networks, where I've been leading alliances for the last 3.5 of my almost 30 years in the industrial sector. I'm very pleased to be joined by two luminaries, leaders within the space. First, I'll introduce my boss, Edgar Capdevielle, who is the CEO for Nozomi Networks, where he has been in that role for 4 years. And Edgar has an extensive background both in startups and established tech firms. An example of that includes the VP of Marketing and Product Management at Imperva. He's had similar roles at EMC, Data Domain, and as I said, other startups and established firms. Welcome, Edgar.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And of course, our colleague Jay Abdallah from the partner that we have in Schneider Electric. Jay is VP and General Manager for the Cyber Services business at Schneider Electric, where he's been in that role for the last year of his 10 with Schneider. He has almost 20 years of experience as a cyber professional and is really a superstar within Schneider and a really good friend and colleague. Welcome, Jay.
It's a pleasure to be here, Chet. Thanks for having me.
So the need for digital transformation has only heightened in the age of COVID, and many companies have had to cinch up their capabilities for remote access to operations. This accelerated convergence between OT, IT, and IoT has really increased the needs for visibility, for monitoring, and cybersecurity more than ever. Today, we're going to dive into this topic surrounding digital transformation. We're going to talk about the trends within industrial cybersecurity and IoT, why the new normal demands really a new approach. What are some use cases, some customer examples of innovative security solutions? And we'll close with a little bit of a crystal ball on predictions from our two luminaries here, as well as Q&A. To that end, please make use and liberal use of the Q&A, the questions section within the GoToWebinar control panel that you have available to you, and we'll be and feel free to type those in throughout the webinar. I'd like to start with Jay and really talk through what are some of the trends, Jay, that you and Schneider are seeing with regard to digital transformation as it relates to industrial and IoT operations.
Thanks, Chet. You know, in terms of trends, there's a trend when it comes to explaining the trends, right? And what we're actually seeing is traditionally, when we're having discussions that relate to modernization, digital transformation, cybersecurity, IoT, and IT-OT convergence, these subjects, these 5 subjects always tend to come up, right? So it would be easy for me to go through and talk about each one of them, but I would like to really point out the last 2. So when it comes to analytics and sensing, without a doubt, we're seeing a spike in the demand. Why is that? So from an analytics perspective, we've got a lot of really great tech out there that's helping us to collate information, to capture information, to put it all into a central visibility dashboard, and really at least gives us right in front of us what's happening out in our industrial control systems, our energy management platforms, etc. But the reality is, without intelligent tools to sift out basically the information that doesn't help us make specific decisions versus that which is helping us to make appropriate, not only operational, but business specific decisions, that's really the sweet spot. So from a trend perspective, we're seeing a huge demand in our customers coming to us saying, look, this is great that I can capture this information, but what does it really mean to me? So it's really important to recognize that analytics is without a doubt going to become a much more important facet of IT/OT convergence as well as digital transformation, because just having that information displayed in front of us really means nothing unless we can make sense of it. And of course, making sure that the appropriate data that is collected really comes down to where are we putting our sensors, how are we collecting the data in a very secure manner, how are we transferring the data in a secure manner. So again, it's not just about the security of the network infrastructure which was really the hot topic 10 years ago, static-based solutions inside of the plant infrastructure or inside of the control system, et cetera. Now it's more about the data in transit and the data in rest, and how are we actually collecting that from a sensing perspective. So for me, if you would have asked me this question, Chet, just a few years ago, I wouldn't really have focused on analytics and sensing as the primary points. But obviously connectivity is absolutely important. Everybody wants to have interconnected subsystems, mobility, the fact that they want to do this from remote locations, even on their mobile platforms, and having that cloud access, not only for central allocation purposes, but also from a scalability perspective, as well as from a disaster recovery perspective. Those are all really important points, and they're still very valid. But at least from where I'm seeing the trajectory of this environment moving, no question in my mind that the more analytics and the more sensing technologies that we can make sense of, the easier it's going to be for us to recognize just how critical IT, OT convergence and digital transformation actually work together to create a cyber secure posture.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that the analytics and sensing piece is really up our alley. Over to you, Edgar. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to double down on what Jay said around analytics and making sure that all this information becomes actionable. I wanted to maybe touch on the sensing, but also really associate with the connectivity and the growth of IoT. We have been learning and experiencing through our customer base that IoT is for real, is coming in a big way to the industrial sites. Many analysts predict that around 75 billion devices are going to be incorporated from an IoT perspective into operational infrastructure. Many of those devices are going to go into our industrial facilities in the form of cameras, new sensors, who knows. And the analysts are also predicting that 70% of those devices are vulnerable or not capable of defending themselves and not having proper visibility instrumentation. So that trend, a consequence of that trend, if you will, is the dramatic expansion of the attack surface when it comes to places where the myth of air gapping existed in the past, and it was a myth from a connectivity perspective, but now that attack surface is going to continue to expand, making it very, very difficult for people to contain or address or even manage risk associated with cybersecurity of industrial facilities. So that's number one, or one aspect that I would comment on this trends. The second aspect that I'd love to comment on when it comes to digital transformation is not just the technology piece. Yes, the OT network and the IT and OT networks are going to converge, and the cybersecurity around them also needs to converge, but also the human element. The human element really has to do with closing the gap and converging of processes around IT and OT processes and governance around both sides. And of course, the teams and the skills gap that may exist on those teams is another important topic that the trend highlights. And maybe the last thing I would comment is the timing. I have an analogy. I lived through the 90s era. In the late 90s, if you were anywhere close to the ERP world, I was doing a little bit of SAP consulting. You had the benefit of the Y2K. Y2K was a dramatic accelerator of the ERP business in the late 90s, right? Because you have Y2K, everybody focused on accelerating their ERP initiatives. And we could argue whether Y2K was real or not, but what's the way that is relevant today is that we're all going through these digital transformations, and COVID has provided a dramatic tailwind to anybody playing a role here. For example, one of our customers, just to emphasize something that Jay said around remote connections, one of our customers only had 5% access to their plant or their plants, so these are actually substations, before COVID. And after COVID, this team had no option than open it to 60% of their folks and teams. And just imagine that without IoT, just imagine that dramatic expansion of the attack surface. And now digital transformation has to accelerate dramatically because I cannot live one more day without exposure. So I think we're perceiving as this time COVID, which is affecting and accelerating digital transformation trends throughout as a very relevant factor.
So that's great. Yeah, the accelerant, and when you talk about timing, the accelerant of COVID in the context of another trend that we haven't touched on, which is the convergence between between IT and OT, and the confluence of that with what you talked about in terms of, Edgar, in terms of the proliferation of IoT devices, the increase of the attack surface. And the reality is, this convergence has been happening over the last 15 or 20 years, right, in terms of IT and traditional control systems. In the context of, you talked about technology as a piece of the convergence, networking as a piece of the convergence, and people, right, the people aspects. What's different about what's happening now in terms of this trend of convergence? And what do you see? How do you see that playing out as the digital transformation continues to accelerate within industrial companies? Jay, I'll start with you.
That's a great question, Chet. Before I go into a little bit more detail, just a quick comment with regards to the sheer volume, the statistics. Edgar mentioned that just a moment ago. You reiterated it just now. The number of devices that ultimately will be connected over the course of the next few years. Now, the reality is, if you take a traditional device, any device, and keep it in default configuration without technologies or processes in place to protect the perimeter and to protect the network infrastructure, the reality is, any of those, connected cameras, CCTV systems, even industrial elements, by default, if they're not protected, the hacking attempts usually begin within 3 seconds of them coming online. So multiply that by the volume of growth, and we can clearly see that if we don't take proactive measures, we're going to find ourselves in a bit of a pickle. So to answer your question, what's different now? Now the landscape's changed. So I think we used to have these conversations 10 years ago, first by defining the landscape. What's happening in the landscape? Look at all these attack vectors. Look at all these published vulnerabilities and the subsequent exploits and all these situations. We don't even start our discussions anymore with those types of stories because it's commonplace. Everybody recognizes and understands what the security landscape looks like. So nowadays, with a difference, of course, coming into operational lifecycle and finding efficiencies and how can we make this work and add value for our business and operation. It comes down to business. How can these types of convergence stories and IoT connected devices, how can they help our business? And in order to answer that question in terms of what's different now, we have to look at value added differentiation when it comes to IT/OT convergence. And the reality is it's a combination of two things. How can we make our processes more efficient and help our operation? And how can we help from a budgetary perspective? How can we merge these two worlds from a budgetary perspective and help me as a plant manager or as an IT leader in a healthcare organization or in an automobile manufacturing facility? If I'm looking at this much more than just security, if I'm also looking at this in terms of operational efficiency and my budgetary life cycle, I need to converge. I have to converge. I don't have a choice anymore. Usually, just as Edgar had mentioned, we were dependent on air-gapped systems, and we thought, air-gapped systems will add our network and host-based controls inside, and we should be protected. What we found is that wasn't necessarily the case, but nowadays, we have to make decisions that aren't necessarily solely based on the security, because if it was up to us, we'd build security infrastructures to the point where the system barely operated, right? Limiting the exposure as much as we possibly can and reducing that vulnerability, that level of vulnerability. Nowadays, though, whenever we have these types of discussions with our customers, the first thing that they're asking us is, talk to me about operational efficiency and compatibility. The second thing they're talking about is, how can we introduce this into the budgetary lifecycle? And that's really the story of IT/OT convergence. So the largest 6 or 7 projects that we've been fortunate enough to win in the past 3 years, all of them have been IT/OT convergence projects, where customers, I'll give an example. a customer will say, look, I just reinvested a couple $1 million over the past few years into an IDS infrastructure or into an endpoint protection system or a central authentication mechanism. I don't necessarily want to have to do that again in the OT world. So how can you help me to merge these two worlds together? And with technologies such as Nozomi in our back pockets, where we can go forward and have these discussions with our customers, showing them the value-added differentiators in terms of OT versus IT network infrastructures, but taking advantage of the technologies together, especially in demilitarized spaces, using unidirectional traffic flows, converging, for example, central authentication mechanisms into a singular platform that can be managed by both. This is really where the big difference comes in terms of what the IT and OT convergence space looked like 10 years ago and what the trajectory looks like now moving forward.
Yeah, so you mentioned the first 5 or 6 that you've been engaged with in terms of big deployments. It brings the thought, and there's a question actually that's come in that relates, and is how does the IT OT convergence, and by the way, we'll talk more about some of those use case examples as I mentioned earlier, but for the time being, as it relates to the IT OT convergence, how is the industry, do you see variances in this trend and other trends as it relates to the various industrial sectors and IoT areas? And I'll turn that over to you, Edgar, to talk about industrial, kind of the difference within industries that you're seeing as it relates to.
I think let me do a couple of things. I think yes, there are various differences between verticals. We have seen more verticals. So verticals that are more advanced, or where the original difference between IT and OT networks was not that demarked. I think widget, just generic manufacturing, tended to have flat networks that are treated primarily like IT networks, except in a different subnet maybe. So that's not applied to everybody in light manufacturing, but fairly common in light manufacturing in one end of the spectrum. And then maybe in the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have kind of oil and gas networks or electric power networks. And just to contrast a little, and to complement what Jay said, let me contrast the before and the after, right? So if we were to take a time machine and go back to a hypothetical scenario, 7-10 years ago, we would be in this hypothetical board meeting. And then, by the way, first of all, this would not have been a board level conversation. But if we were in a board meeting and the CISO made a statement around the industrial control network in a hypothetical oil and gas company, and the CISO said, you know what, that industrial control network is not part of my scope. I don't have any responsibility. That is the responsibility of the head of refining operations. And she would have nodded and accepted, yes, that's exclusively my responsibility. It has nothing to do with IT or security. And that would have been a perfectly fine conversation 7 to 10 years ago. And like I said, it wouldn't have even been a board conversation. If you take that to today, the world has changed dramatically. Everything that is TCP/IP or networked is part of the CIO/CISO world. Just on regulations, right? If you look at last Tuesday when the House passed in the US, passed a bill to secure the entire electrical system, it is absolutely a board conversation. And if anybody in the CISO or CIO suite were to say that same sentence today, it would be a firing offense. So the world has changed dramatically in the past decade, and convergence is extremely real. And I just have to say it, air gapping is a myth. And we need to deal with the fact that we've invested and evolved a lot in IT. We have practices, instrumentation, SOCs. We have a ton of investment when it comes to IT security and corporate networks. And now we need to leverage all of that and apply it to IT, to OT and IoT. It won't be the same. It'd have to adjust, but we need to incorporate IoT and OT networks into the same regimen that we have with our IT networks, because they're part of the same robustness and they have the same attack surface. So today we're in, I'm going to call it, to use a baseball term, we're in the 5th or 6th inning around that initial convergence, but we're also in the very early innings when it comes to digital transformation. Hopefully that helps.
With the, you mentioned the C-suite and board of directors purview over what's happening with regard to convergence and the need, for protecting all networks and all devices, across these converged networks. Considering the differences in industry, considering, the accelerants that we're seeing with COVID and all the various trends we've talked about, what needs to change in terms of the approach for industrial cybersecurity? And Jay, I know that Schneider has a very clear vision on the architectural approach that is required to address these various trends and needs that we're seeing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Chet. We do. And what you're seeing on screen now is our answer to that, right? So this is our EcoStruxure architecture. And for those that aren't aware of what that architecture is, this is by definition an IoT-enabled, open, interoperable architecture and platform. Now, mind you, this is an architecture that is in use in your homes, in your buildings, within data centers, throughout your infrastructure, and of course, throughout each of your industries. Now, the interesting element here is that from a security perspective, we have made sure that, viscerally speaking, cyber is part of every single layer within EcoStruxure. So as you can see, in terms of our connected products, so these are our products, our IoT-enabled products that we develop in our factories. These are things like our low and medium voltage switch gear, our PLCs, all of the components that make up level 0 of an industrial infrastructure. Without any shadow of a doubt, we take cyber development life cycles and even vulnerability and penetration testing from the onset all the way through the finalized development and then subsequently afterwards as well. But the interesting aspect here is once you take these connected products and start connecting them to larger subsystems through the edge control devices, as well as all the way up through and including apps, analytics, and services, as we had mentioned just a moment ago, this is really where we recognize that introduction into more complex network subsystems, and as Edgard mentioned, TCP/IP enabled networks that have more vendors connected, more virtual infrastructures enabled, as well as, frankly speaking, just a much larger volume of data. This is where we depend on our partners such as Nozomi to help us recognize the intrusion detection, the anomalous traffic detection, and make sense of what's happening within those network infrastructures, right? So it's not enough to just have secure products. It's not enough to just design products with security in mind, because eventually those products, just like your iPhone, once it's developed and you download applications from the store and you're using them, and it may very well be a very secure architecture within the iOS, eventually when you connect it to a Wi-Fi system or when you start using it in a larger network infrastructure, it's going to be extremely important for that larger infrastructure to have additional security controls built in. Those are perimeter controls, those are network controls, those are host-based controls to protect the data within. And that's what EcoStruxure is all about. So I lead a security services organization, and it's extremely important for us to design our services and our solutions around what makes the most sense from an operational perspective. And we're really proud of the fact that we've built this relationship. And I meant what I said, by the way, on my LinkedIn post when I said, I'm going to have this chat with my friends at Nozomi, because I truly feel that we connected on much more than just a technical level. And that level is really understanding what does the customer look for? What does the customer need in terms of industrial cybersecurity and operational integrity? And really the combination of Schneider Electric's EcoStruxure with Nozomi's solution set is really the value added differentiator, because here we're talking about two different levels. We're talking about on-site, so on-prem, as well as your higher level platforms. This is what really makes sense of that analytical data that comes back. How do you discern what data is real? And frankly speaking, how do I make my decisions as a leader to ensure that I'm empowered and ultimately make what's best decision for my business? I'm really happy about the fact that we've come so far in designing these types of solutions together where we can get the most value inside of the architecture as well as at the perimeter controls. And here we're consistently learning, right? So this is not a one-stop shop. We're consistently learning, and it really helps us when you start bringing back the conversation to convergence. What is really required here, again, when you try and connect a network subsystem to an OT platform, which typically was segmented or segregated, whether that be physically or virtually, what's it going to take in order for me to make a business decision, converge these two networks together, but keep it secure? And the reality is our two value-added differentiators are exactly what it takes, because we can't have one without the other. You can't have IT and OT convergence without having a foundation of security. You can't have IoT-enabled devices without having a completely secure infrastructure. We like to call them foundational elements of IoT and IT-OT convergence.
I like to, let me jump in with a couple of points. First, of course, I want to reciprocate. The relationship with Schneider has been fantastic. The relationship with Jay, specifically as our executive sponsor at Schneider, has been incredible. We've had Jay in various of our internal events and hope to do it for many, many years, Jay. Thank you for the partnership. It's been fantastic so far. And the other thing that I'll do, and maybe I'll use it in this context, I've seen a couple of questions in the chat. I'm hoping to address at least two of the questions I saw, which really had to do with, hey, this slide represents, you could argue converged technology. You have industrial infrastructure combined with kind of security applied to the industrial world. How do you bring in security into the fold where you're looking for IT and OT to start converging, but you may face some resistance from the OT side of the house, where again, even though air gapping is a myth, that may not be perceived that way or otherwise. And just like as you move forward in any convergence conversation from 10 years ago to today, the relationship between the teams has been evolving, of course, and before the teams were completely separate. How do you create a successful partnership between IT and OT when the picture that you're looking at right now in the slide needs to be real and materialize itself? And the answer that we have found at Nozomi is we can't just apply security like it is applied in the IT side of the house. Imagine that I was a security solution on the IT side of the house, where there's a firewall solution or whatever else. I'm going to show up to your network. I'm going to show up with my box, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to rewire a network while I test my box, and you'll have a little bit of a disruption for a couple hours, and then we'll be good. That is probably a common conversation in IT, but I would get walked out of the room if I had any conversation like that in an industrial setting. And disruption is key. So, of course, Nozomi was born out of the passive world. We have zero disruption into your facilities as you apply the Nozomi Networks technology. Until you get comfortable and you decide to take it elsewhere, it's 100% passive, number one. And then number two, you have to bring value. You cannot just be a single dimension solution that only provides security. So when you look at the Nozomi message, it's not just security, but it's also visibility. We add value to both the IT folks. We also add a tremendous amount of value to the OT folks. The idea here is to present this to both teams so that both teams want it. We actually make the OT professionals more IT versed and the IT professionals more OT versed in the platform. We have a convergence platform. And again, in addition to security, we bring operational visibility that solves real problems to OT professionals that may or may not, it may be a problem that has nothing to do with cybersecurity. It could be remote monitoring, servicing activity in remote substations, which is exclusively a visibility problem. This one happens to also be associated with cybersecurity, but the use cases are incorporating Nozomi as a platform, along with EcoStructures from Schneider, has both a cybersecurity and an operational visibility element that helps both IT teams and OT teams, so that it's not a one-sided relationship of OT just accepting something that IT brings to the table. Hopefully I addressed two of the questions that I saw in the chat.
That's great. Thank you, Edgar. So good time to transition. You're talking about the kind of the various factors that lead to a successful field implementation, and specifically between Nozomi and Schneider, we have a number of those. So I'd like for Jay to talk about what success looks like for customers with regard to addressing the industrial cybersecurity and monitoring and visibility needs.
Thanks, Chet. I think it's really important to recognize that whenever we have these discussions with our customers about the Nozomi solution, we always put forward the fact that this is a 4-in-1 solution, right? It's not just anomaly detection. We identify the fact that we're looking at asset identification, vulnerability management, dynamic network location, anomalous traffic detection, intrusion detection and prevention. So in the case of this example that you're seeing here, which is, by the way, was taken in an elevator, after the meeting, which is why everybody had a huge smile on their face, because before we were all we had all prepared for this moment for many weeks, and I made the 16-hour flight to attend this meeting. So definitely all smiles here, but not just in this specific customer example, but in many others where we've been really successful in going together. The idea is, wherever we have been successful in creating static security infrastructures, for example, this particular picture references a customer in the Middle East that had spent a whole lot of time upgrading their network infrastructure to meet a basic compliance criteria, and then subsequently needed that on a much larger scale. We recognized right away that we couldn't do it alone. We needed our Nozomi muscle to really add the value. So the criteria comes in usually based upon risk reduction, protection of health and human services, ensuring business continuity, loss of any potential financial loss and reputation, and meeting the compliance criteria. So whatever that compliance criteria may be, industry, national, industry, national, or corporate. Now, it's really easy for us to go forward and say, well, we can just toss all of these technologies together. The realities are, just the technologies alone will never add the synergy. That synergy comes in the form of vendor agnostic security organizations such as ours meeting the specific criteria by listening. What is it that they're trying to achieve? I had just mentioned all of that criteria just a moment ago. I'm sure there's plenty others that I missed, but once you understand exactly what it is that the customers are seeking, it becomes pretty easy to paint the picture of why just having one particular, for example, a firewall vendor can't go in and solve these problems, nor can a purely IT consultative organization, because the process level data, the process level history, and the information is just missing. So I believe that the biggest factors in our successes for these past several years have really been understanding what it is that defines IT and OT convergence, and then meeting that criteria with a lot more synergistic approach than just throwing technology at the solution. We've talked about it even on this webinar and in the years past, that people, process, and technology, no question about it, is the winning combination. It requires executive level support. It requires all hands on, consistent training from an HR perspective, all the way down and through operational and technology. At some point, yes, the discussion will shift to technology, and we believe that finding the specific solution sets that meet all of the criteria that we had mentioned is one aspect, but synergies are really important to capture the other aspect. This particular project that is referenced here was a very large project that was all about IT and OT convergence. How can we take existing infrastructures, merge them together, multiple network segments, merge them together, multiple vendors, and I'm talking OEM vendors, industrial vendors, merge them together into a singular security architecture. It's not easy to do. Not many players can do it. I'm very proud of the fact that together we were able to not only meet this particular customer's requirement, but many others all around the world as well.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of things. I think, Jay, you covered the majority of the demographics here. This is a $10 billion turnover customer with over 5,000 employees. They would appear in any top list of producers, and it's been a fantastic customer. This is going to be a very long journey. We're in the first phase of that journey. The customer understands that, as Jay mentioned, this is multi-vendor, multi-OEM, so complete protocol support was important. The ability to provide value right away with the asset inventory was also extremely important. And one of the things, and I want to go back to the commentary around, the Jay's team and Nozomi's team clicking from the very beginning, is that we represent our respective brands, and this customer is not looking just for an asset inventory solution for today. They're engaging in a multi-year effort in which this is only the first phase, and they're looking for long-term partnerships. And I don't care what people say, or salespeople, in terms of what we sell. We have to be extremely clear. What we sell are long-term partnerships where we are committed for our customers to be successful. That is exactly what we sell, and we found that similarity with Schneider and Jay's team, and that's what customers that are embarking in these digital transformations are looking for. And that's why we're so proud to have the stable of customers that we have, and this partnership with Jay and Schneider that is being reflected today.
All right, well, in the last 5 minutes segment here, besides customer first, and that is clearly part of the DNA for both companies, looking into the future, what do you, kind of pulling out your crystal ball, Edgar first, what do you see in terms of both near and long-term consequences of digital transformation and the cyber that is necessary for industrial and IoT contexts?
Well, we see digital transformation is bringing various trends that have existed in IT for a while into the industrial and IoT side of the house. For example, the industrial world is not the world where you have the most pervasive penetration of virtualization technology, but now that is happening more and more. Hardware is being virtualized, solutions are being virtualized. The software-defined world is coming to industrial as well. The cloud has been very late to be incorporated as a trend into the industrial side of the house, and even the IoT side of the house, primarily because of the physical bindings and the physical requirements of local industrial networks. So the cloud always comes with an edge computing terminology, which is kind of your on-premise cloud, or the extension to the cloud into on-premise is then to, the fancy word is edge computing. And those two terms combined, cloud computing and edge computing, are going to continue to come maybe a little bit more aggressively into the greenfield side of the industrial world, as we continue to operate the brown side with increasing levels of technology.
That's great. Jay, how about yourself?
So in addition to my answer being ditto of what Edgar said, I'll add just a little bit from my perspective as well. What I foresee looking to the future, Chet, is we were predominantly focused on static solutions, and that was just the nature of the world that we operated within. Critical infrastructure, isolated segments, in some cases, the attempt to air gap networks, complete physical segmentation from one another. One thing that you're going to see with IT and OT convergence is industrial convergence as well. And that doesn't just include the IT network infrastructure, either on-site or at a central location, to converge with an on-site on-prem facility. What you're also going to start seeing is a lot more cloud-based acceptance, right? I'll never forget about 3 years ago or so, I had a chat with a customer in London. This was previously a Schneider SCADA customer, and they still are, but the primary business that we had done with them up until that point was just SCADA. And we were looking to have a discussion with them about IT and OT convergence and how we can help them from a security perspective. I'll never forget, they no longer had a large facility, corporate headquarters like they used to. This was a shared workspace. There was music playing in the background. There was a coffee shop. There was a dog walking around. This was a very dynamic, young kind of atmosphere that kind of showed, an acceptance of not only technologies, but of operational efficiencies as well. They were looking to find new efficiencies. And the discussion never even started with static on-site solutions. It was all based on cloud. And that's what you're going to start seeing. You're going to start seeing an adaptation of the cloud, whether that be on-site cloud, shared, public clouds, et cetera, using any of the multiple vendors, using a customer's own cloud. But we always say that the sticky solutions that we were always dependent on in the past are I wouldn't say they're going away, but the dependency of recurring services where you have remote access as a key requirement, you've got cloud-based security, you've got virtualization technologies, that's coming. There's no question in my mind. COVID is going to expedite that. You're seeing companies now reducing their physical footprints, real estate physical footprints, and that's going to continue. So the dependency of remote technologies, the dependency of cloud-based security technologies and solutions, virtualized infrastructures, containerization, application-specific solutions, that's going to be the future of ICS. And I definitely see where the winning combination of Schneider plus Nozomi is going to be the trend-setting way that you can have an overall all-encompassing solution on-site, on-prem, and eventually into cloud-based infrastructures to be able to provide the levels of security that are going to be absolutely mandatory in the space in the future.
So looking through the questions, I think we've addressed the three that I'm seeing that relate to COVID impact. We've talked at length about that, maturity, and with it, but kind of maturity by industry as it relates to the long tail of convergence that we've been seeing, as I mentioned, over the last 15 or 20 years. One thing I'd like to add, and it keys in terms of crystal ball, is it keys into what both of you guys talked about in terms of cloud. Is Jay had mentioned earlier Wi-Fi, and with 5G coming on, I would strongly suspicion that that's going to drive again an acceleration in cloud adoption, and it's certainly a topic we could cover for more than 45 minutes. Certainly, that's a week-long type of conversation. But with more to come on that for sure. With Wi-Fi, 5G, and these future trends that we're expecting. I've put up on the screen some resources on how to get in touch with Schneider and Nozomi, Schneider Electric and Nozomi Networks, and really appreciate everyone for joining today. This has certainly been illuminating for me, and I'm glad you've had the chance to join and participate. For those who weren't able to participate live, and those who are on, if you'd like to review, there will be both video and podcast recordings available through the various channels. And lastly, I want to provide a special thanks again to my colleagues and our panelists, Edgar and Jay. Thank you.
It's our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.